Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an article from the front page of the Delhi edition. This article deals with the GST Council meeting that was held yesterday. But for the sake of beginners, first let us understand what is the GST Council before we look at this article. See, in 2016, the Parliament enacted the 101st Constitutional Amendment Act, and it completely transformed the indirect taxation system in India. It provided for the replacement of all indirect taxes levied on goods and services under a single unified taxation system known as the GST, or the Goods and Services Tax. This Amendment Act introduced Article 279A into the Indian Constitution, and one of its key features is that it provided for the establishment of the GST Council. So basically, the GST Council is a constitutional body. The main responsibility of the GST Council is to provide recommendations to the central government and the state governments on issues related to the enforcement and implementation of GST. Now let us look at the composition of the GST Council. The GST Council is chaired by the Union Finance Minister, and its other members include the Union Minister of State for Revenue or Finance and the ministers in charge of finance or taxation from all the states, or any other minister nominated by the respective state governments. So this council, which has representation from both the center and the states, is the supreme decision-making body as far as the implementation of GST is concerned. Under clause 4 of Article 279A, the GST Council has been empowered to provide recommendations to the center and the states on all important issues related to the GST. The council can decide upon the inclusion and exclusion of goods and services under the GST mechanism. It can recommend model GST laws. It can recommend principles that govern the place of supply, origin, destination. It can also set the GST rates, including the floor rates. And it can also recommend the imposition of special rates or special taxes in order to raise additional financial resources for the center and the state, especially during times of natural calamities or natural disasters. Then apart from this, the GST Council can also make recommendations for special provisions for certain states, and it also decides upon the compensation that the center needs to pay towards the states for the loss in revenue that they incur as a result of the implementation of GST. See, under the GST, state governments had to incur a revenue loss because they had to forego some of the indirect taxes that they were imposing. So in order to make up for this revenue loss, the central government made a constitutional and legal commitment to compensate the state governments for their revenue loss until 2022. Over the last 1 year, the central government has fallen back on its commitments, and these pending dues have been piling up because the center's finances are very weak as a result of reduced revenue collection under the GST due to slow economic growth over the last 1 year. So these pending dues have been piling up over the last few months, and this has pushed a few state governments into conflict with the center. In fact, a few state governments have even threatened to drag the center to the court for its failure to honor its commitment. The center's dues to the states have piled up to such an extent that the dues for the December 2019 to Feb 2020 quarter was cleared by the center just last week. So this delay on the part of the center to compensate the states in time has affected the finances of state governments, and hence they have been demanding the center to raise their borrowing limits so that they can at least borrow directly from the market in order to compensate for these pending dues. But in yesterday's GST Council meeting, it has been decided that issues related to compensation cess, pending dues to states, and the question of raising the borrowing limit of state governments shall be discussed in the month of July, because right now the time is not conducive to discuss these issues, because GST revenue collection has fallen drastically over the last 2 months as a result of the lockdown, and only 45% of the GST revenue target has been met as of now. So on the account of this shortfall in GST revenue, the GST Council has decided to postpone the discussion on these issues to July. The GST Council has also approved a set of measures in order to ease tax compliance and increase the tax base so that revenue collection can be increased in the coming months. As a part of these measures, the GST Council has decided to reduce the late fee for those who are filing old returns. and a minor relief has been extended to small taxpayers who have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. These measures have been designed to ease tax compliance so that the tax base can increase, which could result in increased revenue collection. Now let's take up an article from page number 5. The popular Lonar Lake in Maharashtra has mysteriously turned pink, and it has attracted the curiosity of scientists and as well as the local population. See, water bodies tend to acquire a pink color due to a variety of natural and man-made factors. There are a few water bodies in Australia, in the United States and as well as in Iran which turn naturally pink due to a couple of reasons. Either high salinity in the water causes the water body to turn pink, or the mixing of the Dunaliella algae with halobacteria produces a type of pigment known as the beta-carotene pigment, which causes the water body to turn pink. So these are a couple of reasons why water bodies tend to turn pink, and such examples exist in Australia, in the United States and as well as in Iran. Then apart from this, water bodies also tend to turn pink or reddish pink or crimson red due to a number of man-made factors as well. For example, the recent oil spill into the Ambarnaya River in Russia's Arctic region caused the Ambarnaya River to turn into a crimson red color. Similarly, the release of industrial effluents, the release of fertilizer discharge could also contribute to the change in color of a water body. But experts from the Maharashtra State Forest Department and the National Environmental Engineering Research Institute have ruled out the possibility of these man-made factors for being responsible for the color change in the waters of the Lonar Lake. Instead, their initial examinations have revealed that the production of the beta-carotene pigment due to the mixing of Dunaliella algae with halobacteria could be responsible for turning the waters of the Lonar Lake into a pink color. But however, further research is needed in order to confirm the reasons behind this strange phenomena, and accordingly, samples have been collected and they have been sent for further testing by the officials of the Maharashtra State Forest Department and the National Environmental Engineering Research Institute. Now let us quickly talk about the Lonar Lake and its geological significance, as it can be very important for both prelims and as well as for mains. See, the Lonar Lake is essentially a crater lake, and it is located inside the Lonar Wildlife Sanctuary in the Buldana district of Maharashtra. This crater lake holds great geological significance, and hence it has been notified as a National Geoheritage Monument. The Lonar Lake is geologically very significant because it was formed by an extraterrestrial event. Studies have shown that the crater was created by a meteorite impact that reportedly occurred around 50,000 years ago, possibly during the Pleistocene epoch. After the meteorite impact, the drainage of water into the circular crater created the lake, and the water in this lake is both saline and alkaline. The Lonar Crater Lake is geologically very special because it is one of the 4 known hypervelocity impact craters in basaltic rock anywhere on Earth. There are 3 such crater lakes located in southern Brazil. Even they have been created by the impact of meteorites, and only one such hypervelocity impact crater lake exists outside of Brazil, and that is located in Maharashtra. Numerous studies have been conducted to understand the mineral composition of this unique geological site, and over the years, the crater lake has been studied by the Geological Survey of India, by the National Physical Laboratory of India, and even by foreign research institutions such as the United States Smithsonian Museum, by NASA, etc. Various studies have confirmed that the mineral composition of the Lonar Crater Lake is quite similar to the lunar samples that were collected during the Apollo mission of NASA. So considering its geological significance, India has designated the Lonar Crater Lake as a National Geoheritage Monument, and the Geological Survey of India has recently proposed to nominate the Lonar Lake for the UNESCO Global Geopark Network status. See, in 2018, the Geological Survey of India nominated 2 geological sites from India to be included under the UNESCO Global Geopark Network. This includes the Lonar Lake from Maharashtra and the St. Mary's Island that is located off the coast of Udupi in Karnataka. The Global Geopark Network tag of UNESCO is quite similar to the World Heritage status that is given for historical monuments. See, the UNESCO runs 3 popular global conservation programs. One is the World Heritage Program, the other one is the Man and Biosphere Program, and the third one is the Global Geoparks Network. Under the World Heritage Program, UNESCO accords the World Heritage Site status to historical monuments in order to give them global recognition and promote their conservation. Then under UNESCO's Man and Biosphere Program, biosphere reserves are established around the world in order to protect and conserve ecosystems that are naturally and culturally rich. Whereas under the Global Geoparks Network, geological heritage sites are recognized in order to give them global recognition and promote their conservation. See, the Global Geoparks Network was first started as a not-for-profit initiative in 2004. The idea was to bring countries from around the world together to share their best practices and exchange ideas in order to promote the conservation of geologically rich heritage sites. Later in 2015, UNESCO adopted a resolution and it brought the Global Geopark Network under its initiative. See, for a geological site to acquire the Global Geoparks Network status, it has to meet a set criteria by UNESCO. The proposed geological site should represent a unified geographical area with unique geological features. Then the respective governments should come up with a comprehensive management and conservation plan which adopts a bottom-up approach towards conservation that not only seeks to protect and conserve the geological site but also seeks to promote sustainable socio-economic development in and around the geological site involving the local communities. So if these criteria laid down by the UNESCO are met, then the geological site is accorded the Global Geoparks Network status, and as of 2019, around 147 such global geoparks exist in around 38 countries. But please note that as of now, there are no geological sites from India under the UNESCO Global Geoparks Network. The Geological Survey of India has proposed 2 sites. One is the Lonar Lake in Maharashtra and the second one is the St. Mary's Island in Karnataka. Then also note that the UNESCO Global Geopark status is not permanent. Once the designation is given to a geological site, it is reviewed every 4 years through a thorough re-examination and revalidation process that is carried out by the field evaluation experts of UNESCO. During this field evaluation, if it is found that all the laid down criteria have been met by the Global Geopark, then its status will be extended for another 4 years by issuing a green card. But if it is found that the laid down criteria has not been met by the Global Geopark, then the status would be extended only for 2 years by issuing a yellow card, and within this 2-year time period, the management body that has been set up to conserve and protect the geological site, it needs to make appropriate changes and ensure that it matches up to the criteria laid down by UNESCO. But during this 2-year period, if no improvement is shown by the management body, then the geological site stands to lose its status as a UNESCO Global Geopark and it will be issued a red card. Now let's take up a column from page number 6, which examines racial discrimination in the United States and its social implications. See, racial discrimination has become ingrained in the American society ever since the first batch of African slaves landed in the United States nearly 400 years ago. For nearly 350 years, blacks and African Americans were treated as second-class citizens, and it was only the civil rights movement led by Martin Luther King in the 1950s and 1960s which led the blacks to be accorded full citizenship through the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, etc. in the 1960s. So just until 50 years ago, blacks and African Americans were being treated as second-class citizens in the United States. And even after these legal and constitutional changes, racial bias continues to exist in the American society. And it is best illustrated by the recent George Floyd incident and as well as by the recent killing of few African Americans by white police officers. But when you compare the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s with the 2020 protests, there are quite a few differences. For example, during the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, the protesters were largely black African Americans. And the civil rights movement was largely restricted to the United States and it did not find any global appeal. But if you look at the massive protests that have engulfed the United States over the last few weeks, you will find that protesters come from a diverse background. It is not just black African Americans who are protesting, but a large number of protesters are white Americans who have come together under the tagline Black Lives Matter. And along with this, the nature of these protests and the spontaneity of these protests has also given it a global appeal, with similar protests taking place across Europe and Asia. These protests in the United States, which have largely remained peaceful, have given rise to few inexcusable incidents of violence, arson, and looting. But it is highly unfortunate that the society, the government, and the police has conveniently chosen to blame the black protesters for these incidents. The writer says that the society and the government ignores the fact that these incidents could have been carried out by any individual, irrespective of one's race, and it fails to take into account that the 3-month lockdown and rising unemployment could also have contributed to these incidents. See, as Martin Luther King popularly observed, riots are the language of the unheard. But please don't assume that neither we nor Luther King are supporting riots or violence, but we are just trying to illustrate what social scientists have long observed. See, social scientists agree that when a community has been oppressed and discriminated against for centuries together, and if they have not been given a platform to raise their voice, and if their voices are not being heard by those who are in power, then eventually it is bound to lead to protests, which may also result in riots and violence. But to blame all such violent incidents during rightful protests on the community that has been the victim of discrimination is highly unfortunate, and it again happens to be a reflection of the racial and class bias that is prevalent in the society and amongst our government institutions. See, racism can affect a society in many different ways. Sustained racial discrimination against blacks and against people of color, such as browns, Asians, and Hispanics, makes them vulnerable to a variety of socio-economic distress. For example, communities which have been victims of racial discrimination might become more vulnerable to various diseases. Studies have already shown that the COVID-19 pandemic in the United States is already having a disproportionate impact on the black community. Sustained discrimination and oppression against a community could cause socio-economic distress, leading to an increase in crime rate amongst the community. The writer says that blaming these adverse outcomes on the affected community itself and attributing them to their shortcomings is highly unfortunate, because according to the writer, these adverse outcomes are a result of sustained racism by the society and the government against these communities, which in fact has made them vulnerable to these adverse outcomes. So the writer calls upon the society to reject the hypothesis that adverse outcomes affecting people of color are the result of their own failings. In fact, this argument is very much valid for a country such as India as well, which is also deeply affected by caste bias, communal bias, and regional bias. Take for example how Dalits and manual scavengers are still treated by the upper classes, even though untouchability has been prohibited by the constitution. Take for example the bias that exists in our police forces when they are dealing with suspects who are Muslims or who are from northeastern states. Then take for example how settlers from South India are stereotyped as Madrasis in the north of India, and how poor migrant workers from UP and Bihar are mistreated in Maharashtra, especially in Mumbai. These social divides which exist in the Indian society has not only led to the oppression and discrimination of these communities, but it has also led the society and the government institutions to blame the victimized communities itself for the adverse outcomes that have resulted from sustained discrimination against these communities. So the writer says that if the experiment of a democratic, free and liberal society has to sustain and survive, then the society needs to reject such hypotheses. The society needs to acknowledge that the adverse outcomes facing these communities are not a result of their own shortcomings, but instead it is a result of sustained discrimination and oppression against them. Now let's take up an article from page number 11. The Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs has issued an advisory for state governments and city administrations to revive public transport, which has come to a standstill as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Considering that the pandemic is here to stay with us for the coming few years, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs has advised the state governments and city administrations to adopt a three-pronged strategy, under which a short-term strategy has to be evolved to revive public transport in the first 6 months, then a medium-term strategy has to be worked out to revive public transport for the next 1 year, and then put in place a long-term strategy that would help revive public transport over a 3-year time period. The Central Ministry has asked the state governments and city administrations to give priority to non-motorized transport such as bicycles by keeping the pandemic in mind. According to the Central Ministry, promoting non-motorized transport could be a safer alternative to promoting public transport because it not only helps in containing the spread of the pandemic, but it is also scalable and environment friendly. And while reviving public transport, such as metro rail services and city buses, the Central Ministry has advised state governments and city administrations to promote cashless technology for buying tickets and for promote touchless transport in order to reduce contact and enforce containment and social distancing measures. Now let's take up an article from page number 14. Twitter has said that it has suspended thousands of fake accounts which were possibly linked to China's influence operations that were spreading favorable messages on the social media platform in favor of the Chinese government. These fake accounts were said to be a part of China's psychological operations or influence operations, and they were involved in spreading messages to shape domestic opinion as far as the political crisis in Hong Kong is concerned, and as well as to create a favorable global image of the Chinese government by praising its handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Such fake accounts have been identified by Twitter and they have been suspended. Twitter has also said similar accounts related to Russian influence operations and influence operations of the Turkish government have also been identified and removed. See, this article brings us to the topic of cybersecurity and how social media platforms can be misused to pose a threat to national security. In fact, it is not just China or Russia or Turkey which engage in such influence operations, but every government, every intelligence agency, almost all major private organizations, and even large political parties, even they carry out such influence operations by using social media platforms. It is not just entities and organizations based out of these countries that make use of such tactics, but also organizations based out of countries such as India, United States and Europe also run their own influence operations on social media platforms in order to influence public opinion. Such influence operations are also referred to as information warfare or psychological warfare, and they make use of the social media marketing funnel strategy. Under this strategy, thousands of fake accounts known as amplifier accounts, they deliberately push desired messages and they try to ensure that the message or the topic starts trending, which in turn will help in shaping opinions. For example, a government or an intelligence agency might use this technique to shape domestic opinion and to build its global image. They may also use this strategy to ruin the reputation of other rival countries. Similarly, a private organization might use this strategy to push its business and products by influencing the purchasing behavior of the customer. Even political parties are known to make use of these techniques in order to shape voting behavior, and hence such usage of amplifier accounts for running influence operations has always been a source of concern for social media organizations such as Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Google, etc. Now let's take up an article from page number 15. The foreign exchange reserves of the RBI has crossed $500 billion for the first time, and foreign reserves of nearly $8.2 billion has flown into India in the last 1 week, giving a major boost to RBI's ability to stabilize the Indian currency and help the Indian economy overcome the economic crisis. First, let us understand what does foreign exchange reserves mean. See, foreign exchange reserves or forex reserves refer to external assets that are owned and controlled by the central bank. These external assets could be in the form of gold or special drawing rights or SDR issued by the IMF, and it will also be in the form of foreign currency assets such as dollars, euros, etc. that would have flown into the Indian economy through capital flows such as foreign portfolio investment into the Indian stock market, foreign direct investment into the Indian economy, and as well as external commercial borrowings. These external assets are owned and controlled by the RBI, and as per the RBI Act, it maintains these forex reserves in the form of T-bills or treasury bills of foreign governments, especially that of the United States. And along with this, a part of the foreign currency assets and gold is deposited in foreign banks, and a part of it is also held domestically. These reserves of the RBI are often referred to as its war chest. It is because These reserves will help the RBI to support the Indian economy and strengthen the Indian currency during times of economic crisis. When the foreign exchange reserves of the RBI are large enough and stable enough, it will instill confidence in the markets regarding India's monetary policies and India's currency exchange rate management. It will convince the markets and instill confidence in them that the government and the RBI are in a position to honor all their obligations and commitments. These reserves will also help the RBI to directly intervene in the currency market in order to stabilize the national currency. Through these foreign reserves, the RBI can buy or sell the dollar in order to stabilize the value of the Indian rupee. It also helps in limiting India's external vulnerability to global economic shocks, and it will help the government and the RBI to pay for India's imports even when there is no inflow of foreign currency assets into India. When a country does not have sufficient foreign exchange reserves, that is when the country is said to face a BOP crisis or the balance of payment crisis, where the country will not have sufficient reserves to pay for imports. This is exactly what India faced in 1991, and India had to pledge its gold reserves in order to avail loans and economic assistance from the International Monetary Fund. So basically, a large foreign exchange reserve acts as a cushion for the Indian economy, and it will provide much needed space for the government and the RBI to help revive the economy and help the currency overcome a crisis. It basically helps in strengthening the value of the rupee and instills confidence in the markets. And building such a large foreign exchange reserve is a part of the Jalan Reddy policy that the RBI has adopted. Bimal Jalan and Y.V. Reddy, who were former governors of the RBI, they believed that if RBI managed to build a large enough foreign exchange reserve, then it would insure the country against any global economic contagion. So for the first time, India's foreign exchange reserves has crossed the 500 billion mark, and it strengthens RBI's abilities to support the Indian economy and help it to overcome an economic crisis. Now let's take up the practice questions for the day. Which of the following statements are correct? The Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has put in place biomedical waste management rules to improve compliance and strengthen the implementation of environmentally sound management of biomedical waste. The responsibility for enforcing these rules lies on the Indian Council of Medical Research. Both the statements are incorrect. Option D is the right answer. See, biomedical waste is hazardous in nature and it could lead to the spread of infections. Hence, to scientifically manage biomedical waste, the Ministry of Environment and Forest came out with the Biomedical Waste Management Rules in 1998 under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. These rules have been updated in 2016 and it has been recently amended in 2018. The responsibility for enforcing these rules does not lie with the ICMR, but it lies with the Central Pollution Control Board and as well as the respective state pollution control boards. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 4, the National Green Tribunal has directed the UP Pollution Control Board to take appropriate steps in order to promote scientific disposal of biomedical waste and ensure that suitable alternative arrangements are made in the interest of environment and public health. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? iFlows or Integrated Flood Warning System is an early warning system for urban floods developed by the Ministry of Earth Sciences in collaboration with respective urban local bodies. Mumbai is only the second city in the country after Chennai to get this system. Both the statements are correct. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 5, the iFlows early warning system has been implemented in Mumbai, and this is an early warning system for urban floods that has been developed by the Ministry of Earth Sciences in joint collaboration with the Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation. A similar early warning system has already been implemented for Chennai, and this makes Mumbai the second city to witness the installation of an advanced flood warning system that can provide warnings at least 3 days in advance. Similar early warning systems are coming up for Bangalore and Kolkata as well in order to prepare these cities to deal with urban floods. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which country had acceded to the Non-Proliferation Treaty on Nuclear Weapons but later withdrew? The correct answer is North Korea. Option C is the right answer. See, North Korea had earlier acceded to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but it later withdrew in 2003. And there are only 4 countries which have never signed the NPT. This includes India, Pakistan, Israel and South Sudan. South Sudan has never signed the NPT because it is a newly formed country which is currently going through a civil war. So there is no political stability in South Sudan to bring the country under the NPT arrangement. But India, Pakistan and Israel have deliberately chosen to not sign the NPT because all the 3 countries consider the NPT as discriminatory in nature, because it allows the P5 countries to retain their nuclear weapon status while it prohibits other countries from developing nuclear weapons. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 14, North Korea has criticized the United States for failing to live up to its commitments that were made during the historic Singapore summit of 2018, where Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un met with each other, and North Korea had promised to place a moratorium on its nuclear weapons and missile program in return for the United States lifting the economic sanctions that have been imposed against North Korea. North Korea has said that as per these commitments made at the Singapore summit, it has placed a moratorium on the development of nuclear weapons and testing of ballistic missiles. But in return, the US has failed to live up to its commitment and it has not yet lifted these economic sanctions. Hence, North Korea has criticized the US for failing to live up to its commitments. But however, we should also remember that over the last few months, North Korea has increased tensions in the Korean peninsula by launching and testing a few missiles, which poses a threat to South Korea, Japan, and as well as to American interests in the region. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2019 prelims paper. Consider the following statements. Most of India's external debt is owed by government entities. All of India's external debt is denominated in US dollars. Both the statements are incorrect. Option D is the right answer. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, write a note on the structure, composition and duties of the GST Council. The second question, discuss the geological significance of the Lonar Crater Lake and examine the proposal to include it under the UNESCO Global Geoparks Network. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.